according to the International Energy Authority, even last year it was the case that across jurisdictions of the world covering 2/3 of the world's population, renewable power, whether from wind or solar, was already the lowest cost source of power on a whole life basis. It's also a really exciting time in the transport sector. The upheaval in the transport sector is perhaps coming slightly later, but we can already see the acceleration of consumers towards the adoption, for example, of electric vehicles. Last year, 7 million electric vehicles were sold in the world. In the country that is leading on the adoption of electric vehicles, which is Norway, last year nearly 50% of all new vehicles sold into that market were either electric vehicles or hybrid vehicles. And the Norwegian government has already removed subsidies for hybrid vehicles on the basis it's an unacceptable compromise. We're also, of course, seeing the world rapidly focusing on the potential power of hydrogen as a fuel source for ships and for heavy goods vehicles and any other transportation mode where electric, either in the short term or perhaps in the longer term, is unlikely to be efficient. And then, of course, in the technology space, well, we've seen huge strides in the last 20 years or so in terms of digital connectivity. And the last 6 or 8 months has opened our eyes to the power of that connectivity, particularly in terms of the ability to hold this conference, which, to be honest, I would have preferred to the opportunity to have jumped on a plane and come to India to join you all in person. But the power of being able to hold a global conversation over a medium such as this just accelerates the recognition of the way in which that connectivity can drive the way in which consumers interact in markets related to energy and transport. So with that scene set, let me introduce the distinguished guests that we have to join me in this conversation today. Firstly, we're absolutely delighted to have with us Dr. Anil Jain, who's the Secretary for Coal and the Acting Secretary for Mines at the Government of India. Dr. Jain has more than 30 years of experience in administration in both central and state government in India, and has a particular expertise in relation to the natural gas sector, where indeed he's published a book on the natural gas market in India some years ago. We're also delighted to be joined by Mahesh Babu, who's the Managing Director and CEO of Mahindra Electric Mobility, one of the foremost producers of both electric cars and electric three-wheelers in India, and a company that's also recently launched a mobility platform. And we'll come and talk about that a little more with you in a moment, Mahesh. Saurabh Kumar is the Executive Vice Chairman of EESL, Energy Efficiency Services Limited, which of course is a Government of India owned energy company. And the focus through recent years for you, Saurabh, has been particularly around demand side factors that play into this conversation. You've been responsible for the implementation of e-mobility systems, of smart meter systems, and even decentralized solar power plants. So you have a perspective that ranges across all aspects of this conversation. And last but not least, my colleague, Akhilesh Tuteja, who's the leader for the technology sector in KPMG in India, and is also our global lead for cyber. And Akhilesh was last year named by a consulting magazine as the Global Consultant of the Year. So in short, we have 4 fantastically powerful and complementary perspectives on this debate. And I'm going to start by asking some opening questions to each of our 4 panelists. And then I'm really hoping that those of you who are listening will be inspired to chip in with your own conversations that we can take the conversation on with from there. So, Dr. Jain, if I can please come to you first. I think one of the things that governments all over the world are struggling with at this moment is understanding what the future demand for energy is going to be, but also the composition of how to meet that demand. So you're both balancing up, for example, depending on the pace at which electric vehicles are adopted by consumers, what is that going to mean for the overall generating capacity of India as a country, but also depending on how fast you can promote the uptake of renewable energy generation within the country, what does that mean for the balance of power coming from coal and gas? And of course, we know that one of the most powerful announcements that's been made by the government of India recently has been that target of 175 gigawatts of renewable power by 2022, really striking a note of optimism in terms of the ability of the country to move towards net zero in energy generation. So it'd be really interesting to have your perspectives on what the government of India is seeing as that challenge. And I think you're on mute, Dr. Jain. You're still on mute.
Am I audible now?
That's perfect, loud and clear.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you very well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. This is a question which has everybody excited in India, and coming from the whole domain, I can really feel it palpable that with the huge announcement relating to renewable by our Prime Minister and the power purchase agreements which are being offered by Government of India, intermediating between the renewable generators and the ultimate consumers, it seems that the tipping point for coal has finally arrived. And all my remarks, by the way, are my personal, so, and whatever I know a little what is happening as an intellectual happening in the Indian domain. But nevertheless, at the moment, the share of renewables is nearly 12% in the overall mix, and that is slow to rise. And you have to keep in mind that the per capita consumption both of energy and electricity is dismal, very low in India. The growth which will happen in the overall energy demand, which will further impact the new sources, has been dampened all over, as you know, because of the pandemic. Now, given that underlying scenario, government is gung-ho, and as I mentioned that opportunities to sign contracts are abuzz, and you can see that the price of solar being struck in contracts after contracts are really falling down. But whether the pace of this change away from fossil towards renewable is going to be fast or slow cannot be predicted at the moment. I would, conceptually say that there is an impact of 2-3 phenomena which will determine the pace of this growth. Firstly, of course, we have to settle this question whether the migration away from fossil to clean sources of energy is going to be driven by cost considerations or by environment and air quality considerations. So the more the government chips in with various kinds of policy measures and regulation relating to, whether petcoke can be used by industry, whether diesel generator be allowed, or whether in the urban areas they must migrate to cleaner transport. So those are things which are yet to be seen for visibility. The second phenomena is locking ins. As you know that the government itself has a huge presence in the energy domain, because we have government companies in coal. We're the largest coal PS company in the world in India. We have the generation mix of electricity is largely in the hands of government companies. Petroleum sector is almost entirely dominated by the government companies. So there's locking in of pipelines, refineries, coal-based power plants what extent do they allow us to get away? And the third thing is that policy making in favor of renewable energy is slow. And that is for no other reason but the fact that the pace of technology, what is going to be the price of battery storage, what is going to be the drop in the price of solar PV, those things cannot be predicted. So we do, as I mentioned, that as a large overarching statement, what I can make, it does seem that the coal's tipping point has arrived, but to what extent will renewable march in and displace will depend on the new energy that we demand and how the old energy gets spaced out. So I think I'll stop there.
That's fantastic, Dr. Jain. Thank you. And we'll, I think, continue to explore this issue of effectively the way in which technology price is having a massive effect on the point at which you reach the tipping points for the logical transfer across to different technologies. So, for example, you referenced there the uncertainty over what changes now in terms of the cost of renewable power, whether that's from solar or wind. We've seen over the last 10 years an absolutely dramatic drop in the cost of those energy sources. So something like a 90% drop in the cost of both wind and solar power. But the question, of course, is how much further can they continue to go? It's a particularly critical question in the electric vehicle space, of course, because it's the cost of the batteries and how fast can the cost of the batteries drop. Again, we've seen almost 90% drop in the cost of lithium-ion batteries in the last 10 years. But Mahesh, I guess from your point of view, this must be a big factor in terms of how you contemplate the demand for your vehicles and the pace of take-up. Tell us a little bit about Mahindra Electric Mobility for those that are not familiar with the company, or with either your range of sort of trio three-wheeler electrics or the Everito sedan that you've recently launched. So tell us a bit about the company, but also tell us about what your expectations are for the future of demand for your vehicle.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. Just want to give Mahindra Electric is a pioneer in electric mobility in India. We made the first lithium-ion car from the country, and we are now into multiple areas like three-wheelers, like you said, mobility solutions, and so on. India is a very unique market. I have been talking about India's unique market because we have two-wheelers, three-wheelers, public transport, fleet mobility, and personal vehicles. Personal vehicle adoption on four-wheelers in India is one of the lowest. We have 22 to 25 cars per thousand. And if we have to meet the mobility needs of the new generation and the middle class, which is now having a higher earning potential, it can't be achieved by a personal mobility like we are talking about in Europe or US. So that has to be shared. It has to be I would say first mile, last mile, mass mobility plus multimodal transport. So if that multimodal transport has to be there, then we need multiple solutions. We need to integrate them together. That's where we are talking about a mobility solution. So our objective of demand creation is, I think Government of India has done a lot of work on demand creation. Dr. Saurav Kumar is right here. He is pioneer and he has been driving demand at government side with a very unique schemes. So Government of India has done a lot of policies on EV adoption, demand creation, FAME support, fiscal and non-fiscal put together. The challenge now, since in this panel we are talking about energy, I think when we talk about EV, we need to talk about energy, distribution of energy, and also utilization and efficiency of energy when we talk about EV vehicles. Typically, India has a big challenge in grid. I think it's not about energy generation. We are talking about mostly energy, or the power is available for all. It's fantastic. But the reality is, its grid has to be balanced well. Grid needs to be managed well. EVs are going to put a little bit pressure. If you look at overall, even if you convert 50% of vehicles in India into electric, it will only add up to 2 to 5% of energy requirement addition from than what Government of India is right now planning. So it's not about the generation, it's about distribution. how are we going to do the distribution? Because if we have to put a, let's say, Saurabh is planning to put 100 kilowatt, 50 kilowatt high speed charging, will the grid be sufficient to handle such things? And how do we balance them? On the mobility part, I think what we are doing, we have a software platform called Nemo, which connects the vehicle, the consumer, and then we look at the pattern. We have about 250 million kilometers of electric mobility in India. All of them are connected. We know the charge pattern, we know the usage pattern, and so on. And we need to balance them well. And it's important that we think about V2Gs and G2Vs when we talk about renewable. If India's aspiration on renewable like solar or wind is going to be there, it's going to be time of the day. It's not going to be round the clock generating power. So you need to balance them either with storage, which is very costly. And we can also think about incentivizing vehicles. Each vehicle today, like take a four-wheeler, has about 40 kilowatt hour of battery. If you have 100,000 vehicle, you have a 4 gigawatt of power available. So if you can incentivize them, plug into the one, so you can actually balance the peak available in the grid. So that's what mobility platform does. You have a potential to crowdsource the energy available and then put them and incentivize them time of the day and say, if you plug in at these peak times, you get benefit and things like that. So these are all the things which we can create in the mobility platform. So we create products. We are working closely on the mobility solution on the ecosystem of charging and software platform connecting all stakeholders, which is going to help balance the energy demand and the EV conversion. We believe this, if we work together, I think it will help to create India, like any other country, I'm sure, on faster and easy adoption of electric vehicle with very energy efficient utilization in a sustainable generation and utilization way.
Thank you so much. And you've made a beautiful segue across to Saurabh in terms of talking about the way in which electric vehicles both impose a demand, which, as you say, is as much, if not more, on the grid as it is on the generating, but also create an opportunity because the vehicles themselves in mass become an energy storage medium, which, as we all know, is one of the big challenges, particularly as countries become more dependent on renewable energy. So the ability to store that energy is more critical because the renewable energy is much more subject to the wind blowing at the time or so on, and can't be switched on and off as easily as coal and gas plants can. So if I carry this conversation over to you, given all of your experience in rolling out the implementation of these systems, what more do you think needs to be done in order to try to drive consumer demand in a way that both supports the uptake, for example, of electric vehicles and renewable energy, but also does so in a way that is efficient from the point of view of the load that's being carried on the grid?
Thank you, Richard. Am I audible?
Yes, indeed.
Am I audible? Let me first thank you and Mahesh ji for very kind words for ESL. But before I get to your question, let me say that it is a great privilege to be on a panel with Dr. Anil Jain. And the reason why I'm saying this is that when no one knew ESL 7 years ago, I remember Sir was a joint secretary in then Planning Commission. He understood the value of the business model, and he was the first person who went out of the way to give us a project of building energy efficiency, and then he also took it to various international fora. Of course, I mean, he is one person, and there are very few who have a knowledge of the complete energy sector, from coal to petroleum to clean energy, and also. So, sir, thank you very much, and it's always a privilege to share a panel with you. So let me first begin by saying that what attracted me about this panel is the name itself, Convergence. And we have been working on a very similar concept, and now that concept has become a reality. We have set up a 100% owned SPV, and the name of the company is Convergence Energy Services Private Limited. And let me explain what I mean, which will kind of encapsulate all the things that you are asking me. if you look at where the energy world is headed towards, we have renewables which are going to take center stage at some point in time. I don't want to put a time frame on that. Number two, you have electric mobility, which is also becoming a reality very, very quickly. Number three, you have natural gas, which is also now becoming. Now, is there a way that the three of them move together? Because right now, in virtually all geographies, all countries, these are all restricted silos. But we see this all coming together. And I'll give a minute to explain. As we install more and more solar and wind, the grid becomes peakier. The grid becomes unstable. Number two, India is a country where cooling needs are rising dramatically. As cooling demand rises, the grid becomes even more peakier. See, to manage all that, you need what is called the ancillary services, which are essentially the to services to stabilize the grid, store energy at the time when there is no demand, and also help during the time when the ramp up and ramp down of renewable energy happens. So these are all in three different boxes. Now, when we talk of batteries, the first thing that you hear is the battery is very expensive. Now, we have made calculations at $300 per kilowatt hour of battery. Today, if I have to amortize the cost over 10 years, I need to pay roughly in Indian rupees about 6 rupees per kilowatt hour to get a decent return on my investment in batteries. Obviously, if I add this cost to a 2 rupee solar power cost, it is an 8 rupee or nearly a 10 cents per kilowatt hour, 10 US cents per kilowatt hour electricity, which no one will purchase. But what if I break down and have 2 or 3 revenue streams on the same battery, asset class, which is the battery? I use 1/3 of it to stabilize the grid. I use 1/3 of it to charge my electric vehicle. I use 1/3 of it to do ramp up, ramp down support to the utilities. As a result, suddenly everything changes. Now, no one will focus on the fact that the battery is very costly. I'm providing you evening peak at 4 rupees, which everyone will buy. I'm giving you charging at 2 rupees, which will propel electric mobility because it becomes cheaper and it's much cleaner. And the third, of course, is ramp up. It will reduce the penal charges that the distribution utilities have. And on top of it is the whole area of carbon finance that you can leverage to get more investments. So this is the whole concept of convergence that we are building, and as I mentioned, we created a new company only focusing on these. And let me spend a minute on how we are doing it right now. Now, there is a policy objective of the government of India to solarize the entire agriculture sector. Now, there are about 30 million pumps. If you were to do this with capital subsidies, which the government intends, a humongous amount of money is needed upfront, capital to let farmers change over to solar pumps. We have found out a very different mechanism for that. What we are doing in Maharashtra is a state in Western India is that we are solarizing the agriculture feeders in the wastelands or the spare land that the government has. We have given the state power directly to the solar substations at about 3 rupees per kilowatt hour, levelized over 25 years. They are very happy because their cost of service is almost double that number. We have also said if you add, let's say, 50 paisa social service or energy efficient equipments or other services into one single PPA and use it for the benefit, and particularly this is focused towards rural areas to strengthen green, sustainable rural habitats. That's what our model is, and we're also trying to leverage carbon finance. So, in a nutshell, all these things we see converging at some point in time with the ancillary services market, high growth of renewables, And because you are democratizing energy, you are creating energy supply at the doorstep of demand, you can be closer to the consumers. And as you also mentioned, we are doing smart metering. So at some point in time, you can digitize small mini grids, which will be efficient, will be able to provide electricity when it is needed, and also optimize from the generation to the distribution end. So this is in a nutshell what our concept of convergence is. Over to you, Richard.
Well, so thank you so much for some really deep insight there. I love the point about the democratization of energy and effectively looking at this through a sort of grassroots community approach. And I love your point about the way in which you see the value that sits within a battery being effectively a threefold value that relates back then into the way it interrelates with the grid. And I'll pick some of these points up when we sort of go round again with Dr. Jain and others. But first, let me come to you, Akhilesh. A lot of what we're talking about here is about the consumer connection with transport, EVs, and then in turn either directly or indirectly into energy sources. So it is a conversation about the rise of effectively connected platforms. A connected vehicle is in some concepts, a vehicle becomes just another connected device that happens to be able to move. So for the point of view of your sort of technology and digital communications lens, how do you see this market evolving, and particularly from a consumer perspective? How do you see consumers in the future interacting with energy and transport?
Thank you, Richard. Before I share my views on the topic which you talked about on technology, convergence, consumer view of the mobility, I want to thank the entire panel to share some of these wonderful insights. It's always a strange thing for a consultant to go last, so I'm not surprised. I got last here too, but I definitely have the benefit of everybody's perspective here, which is quite rich. I come from the background of using technology to do various different things for the business outcomes. So if I were to look at the impact of technology in the energy industry, it's immense. And it's there in every possible way. So if you look at technologies being applied in an energy industry is to produce better and faster and cheaper. There's a whole lot of industrial Internet of Things technology which is making the production easier and better controllable. If you come to about managing energy, there's a huge amount of technological focus coming in from even things like artificial intelligence, by which you forecast certain things, deploy, and again, the point Saurabh made about democratization, I think that's also becoming very, very easy with new age technology. So is transmission and also the consumption. So if you look at the greener devices these days, which consume so little energy, so everywhere, I think everybody is trying to take the advantage of the principle of energy conservation, that it can only be transferred, and let's bring efficiency there. It's all, life is very, very good. I see some of these great example of usage of even blockchain kind of technology, which is coming in the overall area of managing energy and some of those things making easier. Hopefully they're going to make the energy management trading a lot more efficient, but it's still early days. My real problem with energy is everything is great till you leave home. The energy is becoming more efficient for me to consume, for me to use, and everything is good. But the moment I leave home, energy actually creates a trouble. And let me just take the example of maybe 20 years ago when I bought my first digital camera. And this is the time when digital cameras used to be clunky. And I used to carry this camera which is powered with two AA batteries. It required very little energy. It didn't have a great quality flash. And what I needed to carry with me was some additional memory sticks, because that camera, this is a Sony camera, had only a total of 8 megabytes of energy. And after clicking maybe 60 pictures, it'll run out, and I'll stick in another one, and I'll stick in another one. And the time was that in a couple of years, the memory technology took the leap, and it's now the batteries which I carry. So it's no longer that I keep changing the memory sticks, the memory stick technology took a huge leap and grew exponentially. But when it comes to today, digital cameras or smartphones or anything, if there is one aspect of technology which we haven't really solved the problem very well is around the storage. And I like the point Saurabh made about how the battery can be used for a multifunction thing. But today, if you look at smartphone, the only large limiting factor today is energy. I'm sure our smartphones could be far more larger, far more efficient, far more better. It's only because of the energy management. And why is it a problem? If I was at home, which is what we are these days, there's really no problem. I'm sure we have never struggled for our cell phones to die. But the moment we are all out, so as I said that as in the word of COVID-19, it is better to stay at home. I think also in energy, it's better to stay at home. But now the moment you leave home and get yourself in an electric car, which is what you're talking about, I think life starts to give you some problems. So the first problem which we have is there's a whole lot of, I would say, challenges with respect to the range which you can have, the challenges with respect to the efficiency, and you talked about the peak load management, etc., etc. But I will talk about some of these challenges which haven't been talked about before. And the first one I want to talk about is this whole issue of cybersecurity. While the electric vehicle are not the only one, it could be any other type of connected car, but the electric vehicles definitely have an extra level of connectivity. They all struggle with the issue of how do you make sure that you are far more secure than what you were in a traditional car, because these cars are far more connected. And by car I mean any general even mass transportation system. They all have the ability to get connected, and that brings in its own new set of challenges. Interestingly, if you had your traditional car which runs with fossil fuel or another kind of fuel, you get it fueled up and nobody possibly knows. But when you fuel up an electric car, you actually create a digital connection between the car and the provider. So that creates another level of privacy challenges which people are still trying to deal with. And of course, as the electrification is going faster than many other things. So if you look at it, and I'm not the absolute expert, I'm sure Mahesh will tell me more, is that the speed with which the electrification is happening on connected cars may not be keeping pace with the renewable or clean energy. So a lot of electric cars are also being run on unclean energy. So in some ways, while the real point for all of us as a consumer, I would like to buy a hybrid or an electric car because it's clean, but is it really running on clean fuel from start of production? So I think those are the few areas which kind of remain as an interesting challenge. But I like the concept of convergence which Saurabh brought in, saying that maybe the solution does not lie in trying to solve point problem. The solution lies for us to bring all of these things together, and effectively things will become better. So to me, the hope lies in convergence. The hope lies in the amount of energy being spent in making the energy storage a much easier problem than what it's been. Could be one big game changer in my view.
Thank you very much, Akhilesh. So there's a number of themes that have come out of that sort of first round of wonderful perspectives from all of you that I want to tease out. In a moment, I want to come back to Dr. Jain and talk about this issue of the way in which consumer behaviour drives demand on not just generating but also to the grid. But before I do that, can I just quickly jump to Mahesh to pick up on what Akhilesh said about the cybersecurity of connected vehicles? Now, I'm just interested as a company, how do you look at that issue, and do you worry about consumer demand being blunted by concerns about the data privacy or the data security of the way in which those vehicles ultimately will be controlled?
I think, Richard, what Akhilesh said is a valid point. I think it doesn't apply not only to vehicle, it applies to many devices, because IoT is going to be prevalent in many devices. If you look at home devices, you look at everything. I think cyber security standards are available, and we are looking at cyber security as well. And data privacy, for example, any vehicle is doesn't tag a consumer. So what we do is when we let's say when we connect a vehicle, it is not tagged to a consumer. So it's tagged to only that VIN number which is available standard to it. So you differentiate tracking a vehicle or looking at the performance of the vehicle and who is using it. So there is no data in connected vehicle where it says who is going inside the vehicle or who is using it. It's more about the vehicle, the battery, the temperatures around it. So we are tracking the device, not the person, or we are looking at the performance of the device, and that's the thin line between the data privacy between an individual and a device. Why we are doing it? I think it is very important. We have about, I said, 250 million kilometers. We have close to 16,000 customers. India is a very different market. India is a tropical country. You have in Delhi about 50 degrees in summer. You need to take care of the safety, thermal issues of the battery, which is very unique when compared to other parts of the world, and that is our experience. So our BMS and all that is looking into safety of the vehicle, safety of the consumers, as well as the efficiency and performance of it over a period of time. But what Akhilesh is telling is right. We'll have to constantly look at how do we improve on data privacy as well as cyber security, because vehicle is becoming, I would say, redundant over a period of time. I think when electric, connected and autonomous comes, the devices will become a commodity, and the software connecting all of them will become a prime, what I would say, driver on mobility adoption. That's where we are talking about mobility platforms and softwares controlling everything. There is a study which clearly says by 2030, the effort to develop an automobile in software is going to be 70% and in hardware is going to be 30%. Whereas today it is the reverse. We have about 30% efforts in software and about 70% in various hardwares. That's going to flip around in, let's say, 10 years. So the competencies will change, the behaviors will change, and that's what we are looking at Mahindra Electric. That's why the mobility platform is the one which will flip that around. We will look at various laws which are prevalent for individuals as well as IoTs, and we will comply with all of them.
That's super, thank you. So it's that theme of the mobility platform, in a sense, that I now want to pick up, and I want to come to you, Dr. Jain. KPMG, about a year and a half ago, did an extensive study for the government of Victoria in Australia, which was looking at projections for the impact of the growth in the uptake of zero-emission vehicles, zero-emission and also connected and ultimately autonomous vehicles. And it was looking out to about 2050. And we did a number of different reports, but one of the reports we did was what would be the effect on energy generation and energy transmission, so the grid issues that Mahesh and then Saurabh talked about a moment ago. And because, exactly as you said in your opening statements, nobody knows exactly how fast these technologies will be adopted. We don't know how fast the technology prices will change. So therefore we had to do a range of different scenarios. And under one of the scenarios that we undertook, the total additional generating capacity needed in the state of Victoria was 15%. And under another scenario, the total additional generating capacity needed was 100% more. It had to be doubled. And when you looked at why, it was because of this issue about whether there was any effectively state intervention in consumer demand. If you just left it as a total free market, then everybody tried to charge their electric vehicles when they came home from work. You got a massive spike in electricity demand, and you had to size the generating capacity for that peak. If you invested in the sorts of platforms that Mahesh has talked about, which might advise consumers or give them information, or you do any of the implementations that Saurabh has undertaken and was talking about, then potentially you get a much more intelligent consumer response that can both be efficient from the point of view of the generating requirement and the distribution requirement of the state. but also can be sort of more effective from the consumer's point of view as well. So I'm just interested in, as you look at this issue from the level of a whole government of a country as big as India and as complicated as India, to what extent do you feel that it is in a sense necessary to try to intervene and guide consumer behaviour, because the cost of not doing so on the state is going to be so high?
Yeah, consumer awareness, in fact, Saurabh spoke about my having worked with him on energy efficiency interventions, and we learned that time from him and many other pundits that consumer awareness makes a huge difference to adoption of energy efficiency in any energy system. And so much so that, let's say, if we were to make public as to what is the energy consumption in different offices, people would suddenly start demanding answers, because there is a cost to energy. I was today talking to some of my colleagues that India's per capita electricity consumption may be something like 1,300 units a year, but our own, in fact, I was calculating that my own per capita consumption at my home itself, not counting my office, which you can see lots of lights around, is more than 3,000 units for me as an individual. So, and if you go to rural areas, it'll be much, much lesser. So there is such a big diversity. So if each one of us knew as to what our energy ratings are, it would make a difference to the way we consume. In fact, I was reading sometime that lack of consumer information about the various service providers who provide gas to British homes itself was found to be to have distorted the choices of the consumers in the UK. So consumer awareness is undoubtedly something very important. But let's not forget that consumer awareness makes more of a difference when there is a market play in the pricing and there are no distortions in the way electricity is sold, electricity is made available, and you have choices. So in India, you have multiple kind of subsidies. The electricity sector itself sort of mentioned that they are solarizing the agriculture pumps. So the solarizing agriculture pumps, because in a way the government has accepted that it won't be easy to do away with farm subsidies given in the electricity, which is consumed by the farmers. So because they were getting the electricity either for free or for at highly subsidized rates, the agriculture pump sets were also very inefficient. They used to buy the cheapest in the market. So the government kind of said that let's just make a capital unit. So all the electrification of the grid, etc., which has reached the farms, actually will not be very useful when the solar pump sets are set in. So distortions brought in by subsidy, by pricing, do make a difference. But then at the end of the day, I also made a statement which you allude to, that what will be the future generation mix will be a lot dependent on what are the drivers, and that's where the consumer behavior comes in. Will the cost of the power that I consume, I'm agnostic, let us say, to whether my light is being lit here by nuclear energy or by biomass or hydro, or will it be considerations for environment and air quality? So it takes you back to the essential trilemma of affordability, energy security, and environment consideration. So I've seen, and what I understand, that this is a behavior not particular only to emerging economies, but also to the developed economies. I remember once I had gone to London, and all the cabbies were on strike that day, London cabbies, because they had raised the prices of the gas. So there was a losing proposition, and I think I read the energy minister make a statement warning the large oil majors that if you raise the prices, the government will come after you. So even in a free market economy, public officials and public policy has to be mindful of the prices. So consumer awareness in India has been very successfully done. Saurabh knows it, and the Bureau of Energy Efficiency, the star rating program for the air conditioners and for all kinds of devices, and the electricity and the ECBC code for the buildings. I'm told now that people are willing to pay slightly higher for the dwelling units, the flats, etc., which they buy, if they are told that the electricity consumption is going to be lesser if you were to buy this energy efficient flat. So undoubtedly, nobody can deny that in its awareness. But at the same time, price points in India, let me also refer to a massive program that we took of providing LPG connection to rural homes. So LPG was given, that so that they move away from solid biomass, which generates so much of smoke at home. Is not convenient. But the people, they did take the connections, but the refill rates, skipping some of the refills, and they go back to biomass and other, cow dung and other things, because they don't want to pay for that. So if they were to be made aware that the biomass that you use is equivalent to maybe smoking of 80 cigarettes at a time, and you put your child also to risk, and then you to do the back-breaking task of going into rural countryside and bringing biomass. So I think the level of economic prosperity and the distortion, the price distortion, information asymmetry do make a difference. That is what I.
Dr. Jain, that's fantastic. I mean, you've opened up a really sort of deep conversation here, which is around the drivers of consumer behaviour. As you say, the lights are on in your office behind you, the lights are on above me here in this room. Do I know? Am I conscious of where that power is coming from? And do I care? And I guess I take this across to you, Saurabh, again. Is it enough to just make consumers aware? So in other words, they become aware of where the electricity is coming from. They become aware, as Dr. Jain has just said, that, in terms of the link between choices they make and air quality in their community. Or is your experience that there also needs to be a financial incentive to consumers to make the right choice that takes to a more sustainable future?
I think I completely agree with what Secretary Cole, Dr. Jain mentioned, and answering your question, I think for a country as large and as diverse as India, it has to be a combination of both. I mean, it just can't be one thing. As Dr. Jain rightly mentioned, Bureau of Energy Efficiency had and still has this massive program of standards and labeling, and it has really made people understand what the star labels mean and what does a life cycle costing with essentially energy efficiency equipment, energy efficient equipment does. Also, we have seen the Ujala program that we ran, where we provided LED bulbs at the doorstep of people with information that if you replace your incandescents or CFLs, you will save money. And we were able to do about 360 million LED bulbs distribution in a matter of 2-3 years, and saving, as you rightly mentioned, almost 10 gigawatts of avoided peak capacity, which would have otherwise would have to come. So a combination of both. You have to A, inform people, B, provide them with energy efficient equipments, and it is not always necessary to have any financial incentives. For example, in the bulbs case, and so is the case for virtually every other energy efficient equipment mass rollout, I think the efficient business case is what is needed, as we have shown in Ujala and virtually all the programs that we have done. What is needed here, if you ask me, is an element of some policy making and regulations, because all the payouts or the investment returns to an energy efficiency services is based on a future cash flows. So the risk capital is slightly averse to coming here. I mean, and look at the story in India. Apart from ESL, despite the fact there's so much of opportunity, why we have not been able to scale up private sector investments in energy efficiency is because there has been no risk capital that is coming in. So there has to be an institutional support. There has to be a regulatory mechanism to make sure that the future cash flow leveraging it becomes a norm in this business, and therefore then you can deliver energy services, efficiency services at scale. Having said that, one more class of consumer that we have who are conscious of environment and sustainability can be driven to make changes in their choices by right communication about which way or where, from where the electricity is coming from or getting generated from. So I think it's a combination of all that you need to have.
Thank you very much. And I'm just reflecting on the point that you've just made around the way in which businesses or consumers respond to incentives. And I'm thinking about, if I come to you, Akhilesh, if I simplify for a moment, the whole of the technology sector is largely driven as a private sector innovation space, mostly, rather than a state down. When we look at the energy sector, in most countries all over the world, energy supply and distribution is a state-run decision. And I think sometimes the challenge is how do you bring the sort of innovation, how do you bring the capital in that Saurabh was talking about, particularly at these points of change where you really want both innovation and money to flow into a space. So, for example, actually the energy sector, as we move towards more decentralized energy in the way that Saurabh has talked about, so that's really interesting because, for example, the solar market is much more open to it being driven by private investment and private innovation, and it moves it away from being something that's more of a state provision. Are there any reflections on the way you see the sort of the technology market actually operate, which might provide some pointers as to how we could drive more innovation, more capital into both the renewable energy side and the sort of future transport side of this conversation?
Sure. Let me try and address that question from the two different point of views. So first one, I do want to kind of reflect the point made by Dr. Jain and Saurabh about what creates the right level of behavioral change. And this is one area which one is studying for many other, even technology adoption and some of those things. So clearly awareness is one first point, but studies have proven that awareness without any incentive may have mixed results. And then again, awareness plus incentive also does not have a long-term sustainable change, because for many people, once the incentive is removed, the change comes back to where it was in some way. So I think it's a very complex problem to solve in many ways, but it's certainly awareness is the first starting point. I would also agree with what Saurabh mentioned and some of the others also, that we are seeing a big demographic shift as well in India, and there are some environmentally responsible and sustainability conscious people, which I think hopefully, I hope they are majority not, can also make a big shift of what it grows. Coming to the point of innovation, and I think the tech industry has created some of these good examples of how you can bring in right kind of capital as well as the ROI of that capital, and how do you move in that direction. So first thing I would say is extreme amount of wealth being created at a short period of time has changed the innovation cycle. So if you go back, let's say 50 years ago, majority of the R&D efforts were supported by largely government, either directly or indirectly through universities. So you will see lots and lots of government money coming in the form of subsidiary, research grant, and that's how we moved the needle a little bit. And then a majority of the research which was actually created, the people who created that research had very little but I think the one thing I call the young billionaire category has changed the level of innovation in most areas. And of course, examples like Elon Musk in again in the energy space. Now imagine somebody who turns billionaire at 30 something and believes that, what if I gave away 100 million of my few billions? I'm not going to get poor, but I might maybe able to create something which never existed before. So the dreams like SpaceX and dreams like trying to do them are actually, of course, in some ways financially motivated. They have economic incentive because there are investors around it, but suddenly a huge amount of money at a short sprint coming, and not like a 10-year research project which a government grant could do. But more importantly, the second thing associated with it, that it also comes with an expectation to get monetized. So it's not that something which sits in the university. So in my view, this shift of new way capital, which is coming in from successful, wealthy billionaires, is changing the rate of growth, not just but I would whatever word distribute more exponentially. And because it is coming with a focus on monetizing that investment in capital, it also gets used at the right places, and the life cycle of using the feedback loop and getting it right. So to me, again, technology industry in generally seen, IT in particular, energy industry is not far, and they are part of the same game as well.
Super. Thank you very much. And I mean, this is just another aspect of, I think, why what we're all seeing at the moment and we're all involved in at the moment is so exciting, because, as you say, that force and convergence of private sector focus and innovation coming into sectors which perhaps traditionally had not had that degree of investment and focus in them is really making a huge difference. I'm very sorry we've run out of time. I have the sense we could have continued this conversation for many more hours, but it just falls to me to thank all four of the panelists that have joined me today. So Dr. Anil Jain, Mahesh Babu, Saurabh Kumar and Akhilesh Tuteja. Thank you very much for a very, very insightful and indeed hopefully for the audience provoking conversation about the excitement of the convergence of these three industries. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow, that was one great day, with all those leaders sharing their insights and their global perspectives. I don't know about you, but my